Teachers of sex ed, what is the most funniest / interesting things you've heard? As a teacher, I was about 6 months pregnant when a pair of high school girls asked me, "Can you have sex while you're pregnant?" I answered honestly that yes. One can, as long as doctor says the pregnancy is normal and one can comfortably do so. They were absolutely scandalized. The looks they gave me for weeks were silently screaming, "MRS goats all big and pregnant is having sex?" Student here. Teacher admitted losing his virginity at age 33. Not that there's something wrong with that when you tell an adult. But when you tell it to 15-year-olds who barely respect you as it is, it doesn't end well. While student teaching, I had taken over the sex ed unit. In one of those transition moments when everybody starts chatting, a 12-year-old girl in the front asks me, "Why do boys always come first?" Obligatory, not a teacher. But one time in my sex ed class, this guy in the back raised his hand and asked the teacher if the pull-out method was a viable form of birth control. The teacher then explained that it wasn't really effective compared to other forms and talked about all the things that could go wrong. From the back of the classroom. Oh, fuck. I went to a pretty conservative Catholic grade school, and our sex ed, or reproductive education as it was called, was, as you might expect, was pretty conservative. It stressed abstinence before marriage, masturbation as a sin, etc. The class a year behind me had a kid who was weird. Mostly misunderstood, but weird. They were discussing virginity and waiting until marriage, and weird kid raises his hand. Teacher stops and calls on him. She was young, unmarried, and pretty hot. Many of the middle school boys had a crush on her. In full deadpan he asks, "So, are you a virgin?" Cue silence in the room. Red-faced teacher composes herself and says that is not appropriate. He shoots back, "So, that's a no." He was suspended for a week, and every student knew that their teacher ducks. Someone in my 7th grade class said, "What if you pee in the butthole?" and everyone busted out laughing. Way back when, there was a very confused boy, 12ish I'd say, in my class who asked what the blue stuff women pee out during their periods was. The teacher of course explained it was blood, etc. and not blue stuff at all. He was amazed. He had seen pad commercials on TV where they pour blue water to show how absorbent they are, and just figured women actually exuded bright blue liquid once a month. AM doctor who goes to middle schools to do sex education and anatomy class. Most insightful / hardest questions I've had to answer. If you have sex when you're pregnant, does that make twins? Did my mom lose her baby because she hated it and was always angry? How do 2 girls have sex? What's the point of getting an STD? Not a teacher. Was a student in the same class as a teacher was passing out condoms for us to see different types. Teacher was quietly droning on about something when suddenly a girl at the back of the class exclaims, "Oh, ribbing." It was so sudden, and so passionately delivered, that the entire class promptly descended into hysterics. The condoms were collected quickly by the teacher. I teach math normally, but the other day I was holding an impromptu sex ed session for a grown adult man who asked me if women could make cheese from their breast milk. Not a teacher, but when I was a student, most classmates asked pretty normal questions, except for this one kid in my class. He asked, "When babies die, are they buried in shoe boxes?" It had nothing to do with sex, and everyone started laughing. Thinking back on it, I'm a bit concerned. Not as teacher, but student. So one day after a sex ed lecture, one of my friends asked the professor if you could get STDs from oral sex. The lecturer said yes, and wondered why he asked this question when the answer was so obvious. Turns out, my friend had thought that the act of French kissing was oral sex, to my embarrassment. I thought so too. The lecturer eventually explained what oral sex actually was, and the whole class laughed in a mixture of amusement and disgust. Not a teacher. When going around the class naming steez we knew, one kid said rabies. Poor guy was mocked for a while. During freshman year sex ed, a kid asked the classic Mountain Dew question. Our teacher very professionally responded that yes, Mountain Dew does contain a chemical that reduces sperm count. So he followed up with, so you saying if I drink enough Mountain Dew I can get my girl pregnant? And she replied no. Because you'd need to drink something like 300 bottles of Mountain Dew for it to have any serious effect. And he just said okay in a way that it was pretty clear he was gonna drink Mountain Dew instead of wearing condoms. So she said, which would kill you, and his final response was, man, fuck. Sex ed in the South is something special. Sex educator here. Middle school through adults. 1 year. A student interrupted my flow about menstrual tools to say she once sneezed out her tampon and it landed next to her on the sidewalk. I took a seat at an empty desk in the circle and finally advised that this was yet another reason to wear underwear while bleeding. During uni I was part of a society that volunteered in local high schools teaching sex ed. We used to do anonymous questions at the end of the session where the kids could write down stuff they didn't want to ask out loud. We got loads of the usual does sex hurt? Where can I get contraception? And stuff like that. The most interesting we had was what if I feel like I'm in the wrong body? Led to a really interesting discussion about gender identity and body image. I was impressed with how maturely the kids discussed it. Not a funny one, but really made me realize how important these conversations are. Even with kids as young as 11/12. In my 8th grade sex ed class there was a coffee can that got passed around that students could anonymously put their questions into to be answered by the teacher. One question was if you could get a woman pregnant with 1 testicle. The teacher explained that it is possible, but may take more attempts. The very next question was if you could get a woman pregnant with 3 testicles. The teacher said that if you have 3 testicles, seeing a doctor should be a higher concern than having sex. When I was a student in 5th grade, we were entering the birds and the bees focus of our division's version of sex ed. We were meant to listen to our teacher and fill in answers on a sheet as he spoke. But he couldn't stop giggling. Every word that you would expect the boys in my class to laugh at, he would giggle. And once he realized what he was doing, they grew into laughs. It was like he could stop. Finally he choked out that we should just read pages XY and fill in a sheet on our own. Of the 17 kids in my class at the time, who are now in their very early 20s, there have been 8 babies born. 4 while we were 17 to 18. The running joke is that that lesson is responsible. I wasn't a teacher, but my mom was. She once spoke how a bunch of 12-year-olds thought you got circumcised the first time you had sex. Like your foreskin would rip off when you lost your virginity. I can sort of see the logic. Sort of similar to people thinking the hymen breaks the first time when a girl has sex. Oh goody. I also get to say I'm not a teacher. Dude in my YR8 class asked if we don't have a franga condom, but we just finished eating a pack of chips. Could we use the packet? Pretty sure every chick in the class unanimously cringed and squeezed their legs together, picturing alfoil corners going up there. His follow-up was using Glad Wrap SMH chips equals crisps to the rest of the world, right? As a student, our biology teacher tried explaining sex to us through a cartoon. Not that weird. But she was the prudest lady you could imagine. So nobody was surprised as she left the room while the video played. But the best thing was that the whole animation consisted of 2 figures. Badly drawn. Under a big and shapeless blanket. Their faces were empty. No smiles, but with eyes staring into the camera. And the blanket was just a big blob moving up and down. Not affecting the position of their heads or the feet sticking out under the blanket at all. There wasn't even any explanation. Neither through text or voice-over. Just this image. Over and over again. Weirdest 30 minutes in this class by far. I've heard variations of this one from a couple of different adult men. Tampons and pads are a scam. Women should just take responsibility and hold it in like they do for their urine. I'm male and I know that's not even possible. Maybe someone should make a thread like this for students. I'm still a little weirded out from the guest speaker our sex ed brought in, and that was a decade ago. After this older guy gave a lecture, he wanted us to ask questions. This was high school sex ed, so the main thing covered were STDs and pictures of your junk on STDs. Me. Being the kind of eternally curious kid asked if the possibility of getting an STD increased with having sex with a woman cause of all the juices. Dude went on a tangent about how man on man is the dirtiest form of intercourse. Man on woman was average risk. And woman on woman is the cleanest possible intercourse. Within this answer he told a whole class gay men were dirty while lesbians were pure. Really bizarre dude. I hope he's no longer guest speaking anywhere.